Hey everybody, so some pieces of information, a couple of different interviews that were made with Walking Dead final season creative director Kent Mudle. And for those of you who don't know who Kent Mudle is, allow me to go a bit more into background. So basically, Kent Mudle was a former employee of Telltale for 8 years before the company ended up shutting down back in 2010. He worked a bit on the first season of The Walking Dead. He was a tiny bit involved with a few pieces of cinematics and a couple scenes in The Walking Dead season 2. I believe he talked about how he helped create the scene where Carver arrives at the ski lodge and a bit with the shootout in No Going Back, but don't quote me on those pieces of information. And of course, he was the creative director for the final season, overseeing basic narrative, basic season development. Along with work he's done on The Walking Dead, the final season, he was also heavily involved with The Wolf Among Us. I believe he was the episode 4 director of that season. He was also an episodic director for Game of Thrones. He directed a couple episodes of Telltale's game in that. And he was also the creative director of both seasons of Telltale's Batman. So this guy does have an extensive history when it came to Telltale, and that's why Telltale put him in charge of The Walking Dead, the final season. Now, I've made my thoughts about The Walking Dead, the final season, very clear. I loved it. I thought it was a great game, a huge return to form, and even with Telltale like completely dying halfway through and Skybound taking over, they still did a fantastic job in giving us the last two episodes of the season, and easily the final season was the best season since season 1. And yeah, there's no question about that. It's a fantastic game. But I wanted to talk about, he's done a couple of different interviews, one with Variety and one with another website called Twinfinite. Now, in the Variety interview, in both of them, the subject of the matter is future Walking Dead games. That's a huge topic that came up in discussion when it came to these interviews. And despite the fact that it was entitled The Walking Dead: The Final Season, they really hammered in how this would be the end of Clementine's journey. We're getting pieces of information from Kent Mudle, as well as some stuff from Ian Howe, the CEO of Skybound Games, as to possible continuations in the Walking Dead video game series, not just on other people, but maybe even involving Clementine, which I'm both open to and against. But I'll get more into that later. So basically, let's read a bit from these interviews right now. So the first one comes from Variety. From Variety in a section called Telltale Survival, and I'm reading directly from it. Now that The Walking Dead, the final season, has shipped, a small core of the team, about 15 people, is all that remains working at Skybound, focused on some back-end code and looking into bringing the game to other platforms. What the long term holds, we're actually in the midst of that conversation at the moment about what that might look like, Howe said of the remaining team members, but no decision has been made yet. Howe said they're discussing with Muddle and the rest of the group being what's left of the Still Not Been team that is overseeing. Now, granted, most of the Still Not Been has moved on to more long-term employment opportunities, and that's also a subject matter that's discussed in this, is that some members of the Still Not Been team were also employed up at other places, and Skybound was very accommodating, very open, very transparent with it. It's overall, you really have to, whether you didn't like how the last two episodes of the final season played out, you really have to appreciate the length Skybound Games went to make sure that the game happened. But continuing on in the interview, all of those things are up for... Okay, Howe said they're discussing with Muddle and the rest of the group whether there's a way for the team to stay on at Skybound or whether they should spin up a new studio that Skybound would possibly publish for. So we are possibly maybe even looking at, if they can get the right people and the right funding, another studio. A small studio, maybe the likes of which are similar to Telltale and how they came about. For those unaware of Telltale's history, they kind of came about through the... in the ashes of LucasArts or Lucas Games, getting rid of their classic point-and-click adventure game in favor of other stuff like Star Wars-themed games. Games like Sam & Max were completely done away with, And eventually from that, people like Kevin Brunner, Dan Connors, and others went on to create Telltale to continue on in that fold of the games that they were creating over at LucasArts. And eventually it led to them getting the rights to make Sam and Max games, and it eventually led to bigger titles like Back to the Future, Jurassic Park, and of course The Walking Dead, which got them really going. All of those things are up for discussion, but what really is the most important thing is to find a project that we're all really excited about, he said. That probably overrides everything. I think if we can figure that part out, we'll make the rest work somehow. Mudle said he and the rest of the group have some hopes and ideas, but nothing that's real. The people I made the final season with are some of the best people I have ever worked with, Mudle said. If I can continue to find any excuse to work with them ever again in the future, I will absolutely do so. Does that mean that Skybound could back another Telltale-esque game, maybe even one based on The Walking Dead? And this is where it gets really interesting right here. Are we going to tell more stories with The Walking Dead? 100% yes, Howe said. That's what we do. Every day there's a discussion about that, multiple discussions about that at some level, but at the moment there's nothing concrete that's actually happening. I'd be equally happy for Ken, for example, to tell me the game he's always wanted to make, or the story he's always wanted to tell, as much as telling a story around one of our IPs. In much more of an organic process, I think that openness leads to more creativity, which I think leads to better content ultimately. So they are definitely open to continuing on with The Walking Dead. No concrete information, no actual saying, yeah, we'll do it, but the openness is there. And it certainly seems like they would not mind continuing, possibly even with even Clementine, which I found very odd, considering how they were really telling us that this is her final game. So now on, we move to this article by a website called Twinfinite, which Kent Mudle gave when he was at PAX East last week. In the interview, the guy named Ed asked this: if you're primarily a fan of the video game series, she is The Walking Dead, talking in regards to Clementine. With that said, is there any desire or movement within Skybound to either revisit Clementine in some way, either a video game or some kind of other form of media in the future? To which Mudle replies, I think there is a general desire that more Walking Dead games of some kind will be made. I mean, the universe is so vast and rich, and there's so many directions to go at it. I don't know specifically what any of that will be about, if it will be Clementine or not Clementine. No one knows yet. There's a general creative desire to, we'd love to make more games in this universe, but no one knows what that will be. So this one, he seems actually kind of open to continuing Clementine in some way, maybe. Maybe not as a playable character, but a featured character, maybe something more along the lines of what she was in A New Frontier, where she's kind of more of a side character or just featured. However, where it kind of falls apart with, and this is where it kind of becomes very confusing as to what Ken is saying, is later in the interview, where he's asked how did the team come to the decision that this was the right place and the right way for Clem's story to end. And he goes a bit more in depth about Clem's arc and why they decided to end it there, and this one seems more definitive that this will be actually it for Clem's story. Clem's character arc has a promise that starts in the first season of The Walking Dead, and eventually through all her adventures needed to be brought home, right? This sort of legacy of Lee and all that had to be closed at some point. I think with the idea of making a newer season the most exciting thing we can possibly make it, we're like, it will end Clem's character arc and finally get some kind of closure to that whole thing. And then another question, did the fact that The Walking Dead overall lacks an ending add an extra layer of challenge for trying to end Clem's story? I mean, yeah, honestly, because it's like The Walking Dead universe marches on, like it always will. It almost appears to be the point of it, like the apocalypse is not going to end. It's not really about why or how the zombie virus happens. No one is going to cure zombieism in The Walking Dead. So really, to bring a closure to our series, you just have to bring it closer to a character. You're going to have to bring closure to Clementine's arc in a way, and leave it in a place that makes everybody feel, that's it. I'm satisfied. So with this one, it definitely does seem more definitive that Clementine's story is officially over. There will be no more Clementine, even if they are to continue making Walking Dead games. But would I be open to more Walking Dead games? Of course I will be open to more. I will gladly play them. I love these games. I love this type of style, and I wish it could have kept going had Telltale not, unfortunately, closed down. And as to whether or not Clementine should be a focus, or even the playable character, or maybe it should be AJ. Well, first off, you're not going to be able to have AJ in this game, if it's not gonna have Clementine. Okay, you gotta have Clementine in there if AJ's gonna be in there. Otherwise, you gotta kill her off, and that would kind of ruin everything that the last episode did, in everything that happened and Take Us Back. So, with that in mind, it probably wouldn't focus on Clementine or AJ if Muddle and the others want to stick true to this being the final season of Clementine's story. Would I be excited, or would I be against continuing it? That's where it gets tricky for me. Because on one hand, I want to be like, yes, I want Clementine's story to continue. And on the other hand, I'm like, no, it had a satisfying ending. I love Clem, but let's not try and turn her into this just like, oh, we'll put Clem in the game and we'll make a lot of money. That's what happened in the New Frontier. It failed miserably and no one liked it. So, well, I can't say no one liked it. Some people did like it. I just don't understand why. But, yeah, so that's where we're at currently. I'm a bit torn on this. Again, on the one hand, excited. On the one hand, nervous that they're just turning her even more into a cash cow, which I do not want to see in regards to one of my favorite characters of all time. And I'm not even joking about that. She really is. So, but who am I kidding? If they were to announce another game with Clem, I would be ecstatic. We all know it. But yeah, so that's where we're currently at. The future is unknown in regards to whether or not the Walking Dead series will continue in video game form, if it will be in the same style as the Telltale games or the final season, which did make some changes to the gameplay and some other stuff, who it would focus on, where it would be, what time in the Walking Dead universe would it be, would it go all the way back to the beginning, or would it start in the middle? We don't know. But that's all we've got so far, and that's all I can give you, really. Maybe we'll see more in the future. Who knows? I would certainly be open to it, but tell me what you guys think. Would you be open to more Walking Dead games that don't feature Clementine and are not as horrible as A New Frontier? Let me know. Tell me what you think.